Hel- Hello, YouTube. In this stream, I will be concluding my ranking of the Star Wars films and TV shows. I've done two other streams where I started this ranking. In my first stream, I did 21 through, I think, 13. Just in case some of you are coming in now, I have included for this list the 9 films in the Skywalker saga, along with Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and Solo, along with the 2008 theatrically released Clone Wars movie. Then when it comes to TV shows, I've included Andor, The Mandalorian, along with Clone Wars, Rebels, Bad Batch, Tales of the Jedi, and Visions. I do want to make clear that I'm going to update this ranking as new seasons come out, as Bad Batch Season 2, Mando Season 3 come out, and then once we get new TV shows, I'm going to add those to my ranking. Also, I will be doing a video where I basically summarize my ranking, where I just quickly state the reasons why I've placed each film and TV show where I have placed it. In my first stream, I went over the films and TV shows that I don't like as much. And then in the stream after that, I talked about numbers 13 through 6, where I talked, in that case, I talked about the films and TV shows that I either think are just okay, like Solo, or not that good, like the 2008 theatrically released Clone Wars movie, and then movies or TV shows that I think are good but not great, like Return of the Jedi, Rogue One, Tales of the Jedi, Visions. I want to make it very clear that the reason that I placed Tales of the Jedi and Visions pretty much in the middle of the list is not because I think those shows are just average or I dislike them. No, I like both shows, but at the same time, they are just a series of shorts. Those episodes are not the length of a normal episode of television. If you look at an episode of the Clone Wars, for example, they're about 20-25 minutes long. But then you look at an episode of Tales of the Jedi or Visions, they're like 10-15 minutes long. So I could not justify to myself placing Tales of the Jedi or Visions above, say, the films in the original trilogy, Rogue One, Andor, Mandalorian, Clone Wars. The last two films I talked about were Return of the Jedi and Rogue One. I placed Return of the Jedi as number 7, and I placed Rogue One as number 6. I do want to make it clear that if you place, say, Return of the Jedi, would place Return of the Jedi higher up on your list because of the fact that the movie's nostalgic for you, that's totally fine. More power to you. But the reason why I placed Return of the Jedi at number 7 is basically because I think the film is really high highs. It's a great conclusion to the overall story being told from The Phantom Menace to Return of the Jedi, but I think it's the weakest film in the original trilogy. I have more issues with it than I do with A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, which are going to be, well, very, very high up on this list. I placed Rogue One above Return of the Jedi because, well, I think Return of the Jedi is like has more fantastic moments in it, like the lightsaber duel between Vader and Luke, Luke rejecting the dark side, Vader's redemption, the space battle, all that. And while Rogue One definitely has its issues, I placed Rogue One higher than Return of the Jedi because I like that it's a very different type of film compared to all the other films, even though it takes place right before A New Hope. I love the third act. I love the Vader scene. I like some of the characters anyway. I think there's some good humor in the film. I think the visuals are good. But Moving on now to number 5, we have The Mandalorian. Now, I know that some of you out there might disagree with me placing Mandalorian below both Andor as well as the 2008 Clone Wars show. One quick note I'll make is I'm not for this time anyway. I'm not including the 2003 Clone Wars series. I'll be adding that in a future ranking. But when it comes to Mandalorian, I like the fact that when the show started off, it wasn't all that connected to the greater story of Star Wars, or to put another way, the grander mythology. It was connected, of course, because of the Mandalorians. We saw Mandalorians in shows like Clone Wars and Rebels. But in season one, we didn't see a lot of familiar characters showing up. It was mostly new characters, and it felt like a back to the basics type of a show where it's more simple and straightforward. I found that really refreshing. Then season two brought in more familiar characters. I think it made perfect sense for these characters to appear. I didn't feel like it was forced and shoehorned to have Luke Skywalker show up. That makes complete sense. I don't feel that that was just completely unnecessary and pointless fan service. But at the same time, I do, in a way, miss the approach of season one, where it's more standalone, more doing its own thing. But in general, I still like that the series does feel different from other Star Wars movies or TV shows because, for one, this series is not about the Empire versus the Rebellion. I mean, the Imperial Remnant is in the show, so you see TIE fighters, stormtroopers, Death Troopers that originally appeared in Rogue One, a Imperial cruiser, not a Star Destroyer specifically, but still a cruiser. I like I like the fact that even though the Empire is present in this story, they're not the focus. The series is not about the Empire versus the Rebellion. It's not about the Jedi versus the Sith. We don't see the Sith at all in this show. We see Luke Skywalker, but still, we don't see Jedi very often, with the exception of Ahsoka and Luke. Though Ahsoka doesn't call herself Jedi, but I would say she does demonstrate a lot of the values of the Jedi. But aside from that, this show also does not focus on the Force. The Force is present, but it's more in the background. It's not actually the focus of the show. And I also like how this show explores the Mandalorians more because we learn about the Children of the Watch. We learn that there's this group of Mandalorians that have broken away from Mandalorian society, as Bo-Katan says in season two, because this sect of Mandalorians is basically a cult because they believe in all these old-fashioned Mandalorian traditions and customs. They practice these rules and observe them very strictly. The big one being that they don't at all remove their helmets, even though Bo-Katan and other Mandalorians that we saw in the Clone Wars and Rebels have absolutely no problem taking their helmets off. This Mandalorian cult is much more extreme than other Mandalorians. I think it's really interesting. You have both the Armorer and her group of Mandalorians, and then Bo-Katan's group. You see the big contrast between the two. The action in this series is very well done. I think the score by Ludwig Göransson, very well done. It has a very Western feel to it, which is very fitting because this show very much feels like a Star Wars Western. That's something that I really do enjoy. You even have a classic Western trope in the first episode. That trope being the gunslinger entering the bar, getting into a fight, and then beating up the people that tried to beat him up. We see that with Mando in the first episode. Also, Mando has a really good arc throughout these 2 seasons because at first he obeys all the rules of the Mandalorian cult that he's in all the time. He's rather cold. He just cares about doing his job. He cares about the mission, but there's not someone in his life that he really cares about. He has no problem at all with killing people. We see that right away. And there's even this rather brutal moment where Mando makes sure that this other guy is crushed by a door. But as Mando at first meets Grogu and then spends more time with Grogu, we don't learn that this creature, this baby Yoda, is named Grogu until season 2. But as Mando spends more time with the kid, baby Yoda, Grogu, he grows to care about Grogu more and more. In fact, in season 2, we see that Mando actually willingly takes off his helmet because he decides this kid is more important to me than the rules that I've been following for my whole life, basically. Because the Mandalorians took in Din Djarin when he was just a kid, and then he was taught all these rules and customs. But as Mando grows to care more and more about Grogu, he slowly starts to break away from this Mandalorian cult that he's been a part of for so long. In season 1, Mando actually does hand over this child to the Imperials at first, but then just as Mando's about to leave the planet, he decides, no, I'm going to go back for Baby Yoda because I should not have turned him into the Imperials. I cannot bear to leave him here with them. So he actually shows selflessness because he goes back to save the kid. This leads to him being estranged from the Bounty Hunters Guild because he was supposed to just hand Baby Yoda over and then not ask any questions, not go back for him at all because the job was considered to be done. Mando delivered this quarry, the kid that the client was looking for, and was paid as reward for him completing the job successfully. So he was just supposed to leave it alone at that point, but he chooses to go back for Baby Yoda, and so that leads to him separating from Grief Karga and these other bounty hunters. And then in this really powerful moment, we see all the other Mandalorians come back for Din Djarin. In fact, this one guy who has this really big gun says, "You go, we'll hold them off." That's really powerful because earlier on in the season, after Mando came back from delivering the child to the Imperials, he came back with with a large amount of Beskar. Once the other Mandalorians learned about this, they were not happy at all because that was Beskar that the Empire took from the Mandalorians during the Great Purge. This happened a long time before the events of The Mandalorian, where the Empire bombed the planet of Mandalore, destroyed the capital city, initiated the Great Purge, which resulted in there being far less Mandalorians, and they took Beskar from them. So when Mando comes back to this hideout that these Mandalorians have been hiding in with this Beskar that he got from the Imperials, they feel absolutely insulted by that. In particular, that one Mandalorian with the big gun, he was really not happy. It's very powerful that when you then get to episode 3 of season 1, this guy actually not only comes back to save Din Djarin, but he says, "You go, we'll hold them off." It's sad in hindsight because we learn later on in the season that them coming out of hiding and revealing themselves resulted in the Imperial remnant hunting down all these Mandalorians and killing them. Only a couple managed to survive, but it's still powerful that these Mandalorians chose to come out of hiding. They chose to reveal themselves in order to save Din Djarin rather than just leaving him to dry. And then in the season finale, Mando is injured by Moff Gideon, and then he has to get medical attention because of his injuries. That requires his helmet to be taken off, but at first he doesn't want his helmet to be taken off because of all these rules that he's been following for so long. But then he allows IG-11 to take off his helmet using the loophole that IG-11 is only a droid, not actually a person. But this is the first step in Mando's arc of him breaking away from this Mandalorian cult, him actually deciding there's something that matters more to me than these rules. So first, Mando allows IG-11 to take his helmet off. And then in season 2, Mando and Mayfeld go to this base in order to get information that they need to save Grogu. But Mando has to take his helmet off in order for this to work. At first, he doesn't want to do it. But then, when he's presented with this choice, the choice of, do I follow the rules that I've followed for so long, or do I take my helmet off in order to save my child? And Mando chooses Grogu over these rules. And then in the season finale, right before Grogu leaves Luke, Mando chooses willingly to take his helmet off in front of everyone else. Not even because something forced him to, but because he on his own chose to take his helmet off so that his child could see his face one time before Grogu left with Luke. That was a very powerful and well done moment. Also, Pedro Pascal, the actor who plays Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, he does a great job, especially considering that this is a tough role to play because when Mando has his helmet on, you can't see his face. So the actor can't rely on facial expression to convey his emotions. He has to rely on tone of voice and body language to convey what emotions Din Djarin is feeling. We see Din Djarin's face a couple times throughout seasons 1 and 2, but most of the time, Mando has his helmet on, and yet Pedro Pascal does a very effective job of communicating so much with so little. He manages to convey the audio. He manages to make sure that the character Din Djarin conveys so much emotion just through subtle feints, just through his tone of voice and body language. Also, Grief Karga is a really good character. I like the arc that he has, where at first he just cares about following the rules of the Bounty Hunter Guild, giving bounty hunters their assignments, but then he grows to actually care about Baby Yoda. At first, he thinks Baby Yoda's with the Imperials. It's the rule of the guild to not ask questions after a job has been completed. But then Baby Yoda saves Grief Karga's life using force healing. So that causes Grief to start to care about the child. And so he reveals that I was supposed to betray you two and take the kid. He says that to Mando and Cara Dune, but I cannot go through with that. And then with Cara Dune, she's a really well done character. It's interesting that we get to see this former member of the Rebel Alliance who left when the Rebel Alliance became the government of the New Republic, and now she's just on her own, but then she meets Mando and ultimately helps to save Grogu. And we see that she's a very skilled fighter and combatant. So I really like her character, and Baby Yoda is very cute, very adorable. In fact, he quickly became a meme. He quickly became very well known. There's tons of toys about him, tons of merchandise. But I really, really enjoy the relationship that develops between Din Djarin and Grogu. I like that father-son relationship where Din Djarin becomes the Papa Wolf to his child. Also, man, that Luke scene in Mando season 2 is absolutely incredible. Oh, it's so amazing that we actually get to see Luke Skywalker in his prime as a Jedi, just destroying these dark troopers. We see him both use his lightsaber and use the force. We see him crush a dark trooper, slam one against the wall. It's incredible, especially when you consider that in Return of the Jedi, yeah, we see Luke is skilled with lightsabers. He knows how to fight with a lightsaber very well. But even though we do see him use the Force a couple times, he doesn't use the Force all that often in Return of the Jedi. We don't really see him do something incredibly impressive in that film with Force. But then we actually get to see it in Mando season 2. And it makes perfect sense in the story because Grogu called out to a Jedi. Luke is a Jedi that's out there and would be interested in a force sensitive child like Grogu. So it makes perfect sense for him to show up. Also, I love seeing Bo Katan for the first time in live action. Same thing with Ahsoka, who's become one of the best characters in the entire franchise. It also made perfect sense for Boba Fett to show up because he was looking for his armor. And I love so much. I think it's so amazing that we actually get to see Boba Fett being awesome, actually living up to his reputation. We see him destroy these stormtroopers. And we see him use this gaffy stick to absolutely demolish these stormtroopers. It's both brutal but awesome at the same time. And then we get to see Boba Fett in the armor in full Boba Fett glory, demolishing all these stormtroopers. And then he uses the rocket on his jetpack to take out two transports. And he says, "Oh, I was just aiming for one of them," which is a very funny line. But that was awesome to see, especially when you think about this. In the original trilogy, yeah, it's implied that he's an awesome, badass bounty hunter because in The Empire Strikes Back, Boba Fett is one of the bounty hunters hired by Darth Vader to find the Millennium Falcon. We see Darth Vader singles out Boba Fett. And he doesn't single out anyone else. He singles out Boba Fett, says, "No disintegrations." That one line alone implies that there's a history there between Darth Vader and Boba Fett. In fact, you get the sense from that movie that Boba Fett has this reputation that Darth Vader's aware of. In fact, later on, Boba Fett says, "What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me," referring to Han Solo, who is just about to be put into carbonite. Darth Vader says, "The Empire will compensate you if he dies." The fact that Darth Vader wants to make sure that Boba Fett gets what he wants, that he says to Boba Fett, "We will compensate you if he dies." That tells us that Boba Fett has a reputation that Darth Vader is aware of. But in the original trilogy, we don't actually get to see Boba Fett live up to this reputation. We don't actually get to see him being an awesome and talented bounty hunter. He barely does anything all the time that he's on screen in the original trilogy. Yeah, we see him get into action a little bit in Return of the Jedi, but then the way he dies is embarrassing. It's comical, in fact, that Boba Fett is taken out just because a blind Han Solo accidentally hits his jetpack, which causes Boba to fall into the Sarlacc pit. So we don't actually see in the original trilogy why it is that Boba Fett seems to have this reputation that Darth Vader is aware of. We don't actually get to see Boba Fett in action being an awesome, talented bounty hunter. He doesn't even have much screen time in the original trilogy for that matter, barely even has any lines of dialogue. And yet, what's so hilarious is that even though Boba Fett does so little in the original trilogy, even though he barely gets in the action, he's been regarded by Star Wars fans as this awesome, talented bounty hunter for about 40 years at this point. And then finally, in Mando Season 2, for the first time ever, we actually see Boba Fett be awesome, live up to his reputation that had always been implied but never actually shown. Maybe it was shown in books or comics, sure, sources that not as many people are familiar with, but on screen, we had never seen Boba Fett be awesome the way we did in Mando Season 2. And it was amazing. But I will say, with Season 2, I liked it, don't get me wrong. The ending was absolutely fantastic. But the episodes were more simplistic. The reason why I say that is because they for the most part tended to be pretty similar, follow the same structure, use the same basic plot. That being, Mando goes to some place to either find something that he needs or find someone he wants to talk to, or someone that he wants a favor from. And also, in that regard, several of the episodes, like the episode of Bo-Katan or the episode of Ahsoka, they use the exact same favor model where Mando's like, I'll help you if you help me. Basically, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. So I found the episodes to be a bit repetitive, a bit simplistic, but I still enjoyed pretty much all of them, though. However, having said that, episode 2 of season 2, chapter 10, The Passenger, I find to be complete filler. Just like on season 1, I think episode 5, Gunslinger, is complete and utter filler. In fact, these are two episodes that I have no desire at all to ever watch again. I actually rewatched Mandalorian just recently. I skipped both of those episodes, and I didn't feel like I missed anything. Because with The Passenger, what happens in that episode just doesn't matter for the season as a whole. It's just an unnecessary rabbit trail, an unnecessary side quest that is inconsequential to the season and doesn't matter at all. Same thing with episode 5. I mean, yeah, as we learn later on, do technically see Boba Fett, but that's all recapped in season 2 anyway, and we never see the titular gunslinger again, plus the titular gunslinger is not all that interesting. So that's an episode that I just don't care to ever watch again because it just comes off as completely unnecessary. I still ultimately enjoy the show. I've really been enjoying The Mandalorian. I found it to be a breath of fresh air for the franchise. It's much more of a Western in space. With season 1, the episodes in the middle are a bit slow. Like the episode called The Sanctuary, which is episode 4. It's in some ways kind of unnecessary, but at the same time, what I really enjoy about that episode is we see Mando getting a glimpse of the life he potentially could have if he stopped being on mission all the time. He sees Grogu living this peaceful life that he wants for Grogu. He basically says, Grogu shouldn't be with me. because a life with me is not a life that's good for a child. He should be with other children. He should be able to have fun. But then Mando and Kara learn that bounty hunters are still tracking Grogu, so he'll never be safe. And therefore, Grogu goes back with Mando. And we also see Mando and Cara Dune helping these villagers to defeat this ATST. That was something I enjoyed seeing. So it's an episode that doesn't matter all that much really for the plot of the season, but there's a lot of good character stuff in there. So I still like the episode, even though it's not my favorite episode of the season. With episode 6, that one is a really fun episode that, yeah, it doesn't really matter too much for the plot of season 1. In a way, it's kind of filler, but I enjoy it because I think it's just different, really fun to watch. So overall, I do like Mandalorian, but I don't think it's as good as Andor. The reason for that is because I find Andor to be the more mature, sophisticated, and better written show than Mandalorian. Admittedly, Mandalorian is more fun to watch, more entertaining, but I found Andor to be such a pleasant surprise. It was so much better than I was expecting. I did not have high expectations for this show. I wasn't even excited for it. And it turned out to be fantastic. So that's why I'm placing Andor at number 4. I was not excited for this show at all because when I first heard about it, I thought, what? They're doing a movie about Cassian Andor, who's not even the main character in Rogue One, but just one of the primary characters who wasn't all that interesting in the movie. Why does he get his own series? That seems really bizarre. Plus, this is set in a time period that's been very well explored. One of my big beefs I still have with the franchise as a whole, looking at the bigger picture, is I do not like at all how boxed in so much of Star Wars, so much of the content that comes out is. Because so much of the content is set between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. It's been explored to death because we had Rebels, we had Kenobi, we now have Andor, 3 different TV series set in that same time period. And we have Rogue One and Solo. Plus, you got all the books, all the comics, the video games. That really, really bothers me. That Star Wars has such a hard time just branching out to different time periods. You don't need to keep everything boxed in to 19 years. That's a pathetically small, a minuscule amount of time in Star Wars because of the fact that the Republic stood for 2,500 years, plus the old EU, now called Star Wars Legends, explored this time period called the Old Republic, which is set thousands of years before the prequels. That would be so much more interesting because that would actually be really different. That would be a risk. Or for that matter, you could do stories set a long time after the sequel trilogy. Star Wars Legends went up to 150 years after Return of the Jedi. But content that comes out nowadays for Star Wars, it's so boxed in to just 19 years. In fact, broadening that out a bit, Star Wars is boxed in so much to the time period between Attack of the Clones and A New Hope. There's been so much content set in that, again, really, really small window of time in Star Wars. There's so much potential here. There's so many other time periods you could explore. Star Wars keeps being boxed in so much where it's exploring the same time period, exploring some of the same characters. It's not taking enough risks as far as I'm concerned. Yes, there's the High Republic Publishing Initiative, composed of books and comics, that is set during the High Republic era, which is for the prequels. That's a bit better, but this is only a few hundred years before the prequels, not several thousand years. There's a huge, huge difference there. But here's the problem. These books and comics are not very well known to the more casual Star Wars fans who don't know much about the High Republic, and a lot of the times don't follow the books and comics very much anyway. And we have, aside, yeah, that's the one major exception. We are going to be getting the show The Acolyte at some point, which is set during the High Republic. But for the most part, Star Wars has been so boxed in. This one small window of time, it really bothers me. But moving on, however, I wasn't excited about Andor because it was a character I didn't find all that interesting, a time period that has been very, very thoroughly explored. So I was not looking forward to Andor. I didn't have high hopes for it. But man, it turned out to be such a refreshing show and such a pleasant surprise. Yes, Andor is more slow compared to other Star Wars shows. A good way to describe it would be a slow burn. That's because of really the way Andor is structured. The first three episodes are one single arc. Episode 1 sets all the pieces up. Episode 2 builds up the tension. And then episode 3 pays off all that tension. And then episodes 4 through 6 are the second arc of the season about Heist on Aldhani. The first arc was about Ferrix. Then you have episode 7, which is a transition episode that doesn't start the next arc of the season. Episodes 8 through 10 are the next arc of the season. That's the prison break arc. And then you have episodes 11 and 12, which is the final arc. Yes, this show does not have as many familiar Star Wars elements as other shows or movies do. Because in this show, we're not seeing characters like Palpatine, Vader, Luke, Han, Leia. None of the big name characters show up. But there are a few familiar Star Wars characters that show up, like Saw Gerrera, who has appeared in several other pieces of content like Jedi Fallen Order, Bad Batch, Rebels, and Clone Wars. And then Mon Mothma, Ruth Scott Melshi, who did appear in Rogue One, but he was a very minor character in that movie. He was just one of the rebels that went to Scarif. And then we also see Wolf Yularen, who originally appeared in the Clone Wars and then appeared in Rebels. But that's it. You just have those few characters from other stories that show up. And this is also a show that is more aimed at an adult audience. It is more dark or gritty, so it's not as fun or entertaining to watch as other Star Wars shows, but I found it to be just so satisfying. A good analogy, I think, for this show is it's like a fine wine that the more you sit on it, the more you realize how good it really is. I mean, the characters for this show are very well done. Cassian is a really good character because he's a great arc where he starts off selfish because he just cares about himself and his family. He doesn't care about fighting the Empire. He's not in on the cause. At first, he's really just a mercenary who wants the money. But by the end of the series, by the end of season 1, he truly is a rebel. He's in on the cause. He admittedly doesn't always take center stage, but I still think Diego Luna gives a really good performance. I also think Stellan Skarsgård and Andy Serkis do a fantastic job. I like basically all the characters, but I think those two characters in particular, Luthen Rael, played by Stellan Skarsgård, and Kino Loy, played by Andy Serkis, are two of the highlights. In episode 7, Andor is unjustly arrested for no reason at all. I like that because it perfectly represents what the Empire is, what their basic philosophy is. Their philosophy is we are constantly looking for enemies. We are looking for any excuse to brand someone as a traitor, an insurgent, an enemy, whatever phrase you want to use. They're paranoid and suspicious of everyone because their whole philosophy is having domination and control over others, not working together with others. With the Empire, you have a system where betrayal, lying, backstabbing is all allowed and even encouraged. The Empire often an officer will backstab another officer to get themselves a promotion. Since the Empire is fundamentally about selfishness, it's about getting power in order to have domination and control over others. So you're not encouraged to work with the people around you, you're encouraged to work against them in order to help your own self interest. And the Empire will just arrest people for no reason at all. The more enemies, quote unquote, the Empire has, the more they can justify their brutal and oppressive nature where they subjugate people. So Andor being arrested for no reason makes perfect sense. And then when we see Andor put on trial, we see that it's a complete kangaroo court. It's all an absolute sham where nothing where there's no process at all of people being put on trial like you see in the real world where people have rights. No, none of that's there at all. It's just a judge reading off sentences, and then Andor's like, "What? I didn't do anything. Please listen to me." The judge just doesn't care at all. She's like, take it up with the Emperor," basically saying, "Hey, you're being arrested no matter what. It doesn't matter whether you're innocent or guilty. You're going away. Sorry, tough luck. There's nothing that can be done." Then Andor is sent to this prison on Narkina 5, where the floors are electrified and all these prisoners are building these things. We don't know what they are at first. Andor meets this guy named Kino Loy, who's a floor manager of level 5 of the Narkina 5 prison. The arc that Kino Loy goes through is fantastic because at first, Kino Loy just follows the rules. He thinks, if I keep my head down, if I do everything the way that they want, if I always follow the rules, do what I'm told, then I will get out of here. I will go home. I only have 217 days left on my sentence. I'm going to get out of here. But Kino realizes that's not true. This game can't be played. None of these people are ever going to be released by the Empire. They'll just find any excuse, whether it makes sense or not, to keep all these people imprisoned. In episode 9, Kino learns from this doctor the truth, and you can see how his whole worldview completely changes. Then the moment at the end of episode 9 where he finally tells Cassian how many guards there are on each level is so satisfying. It's like, yes, Kino is on Cassian's side. Because earlier on in episode 9, Kino refused to answer Cassian's question, so he wasn't on Cassian's side then, but by the end of episode 9, he is. And I love that in episode 10, Andor is encouraging Kino Loy to be the leader that he needs to be, to step up to the plate. Kino does that. I love the moment where Cassian tries to talk with the other prisoners, but it's not working. It doesn't work until Kino steps up to the plate and tells them, no one is going home. None of us are going to get out of here unless we break out of here. And I love the moment where Kino and Cassian are talking. Cassian's saying, we need to do it tomorrow because that will be the best opportunity that we'll ever have. Kino doubts this at first, but then Cassian says, I'd rather die fighting them than die giving them what they want. you can see how much this affects Kino. There's this great reversal too, where at first Kino's the one telling Cassian to stay on program, which means going like this. But then Kino tells Cassian to stay on program. And then when the prisoners all start to break free, it's so satisfying to see that these guards who were so harsh and mean to these prisoners are now just cowering in fear. The reason for that is because they don't have control anymore. It's so satisfying when you see that once they don't have power anymore, once they are not in control, once they no longer have all these prisoners crushed under the heel of their boot, that they are just powerless and cowering in fear because there's nothing that they can do anymore after how oppressive they were. It's so satisfying when they get their comeuppance. These guards obviously thought, we have all these guys crushed under the heel of our boot. They'll never, ever rise up against us. We have the power here. We are in control over them. But then, once they don't have control, the game is up. And then the moment where Kino gives that speech is incredible. In fact, actually, going back earlier on, I love the moment where when Kino talks to the other prisoners and tells them we're not going home. He says, I'm going to assume I'm already dead. And then Kino at first is hesitant, but then with some encouragement from Cassian, Kino gives his speech where he repeats Cassian's own words. I'd rather die fighting them than die giving them what they want. It's such an awesome moment of triumph when Kino gives his speech. All the prisoners are breaking free, and then they do escape. But then you have this heartbreaking moment where Kino says, I can't swim. It hits so hard that Kino fought so hard to save everyone else, but then he can't enjoy the freedom that he fought so hard to achieve. We see by the end that Kino was truly a hero, that in the end he put his life on the line to ensure that everyone else could be free. He demonstrated great selflessness. He obviously decided, I do not care what happens to me. I am going to fight to ensure everyone else will be free, regardless of whether I make it out of this alive, regardless of what happens to me afterward. I am going to fight regardless of the consequences. So well done. And it beautifully parallels Cassian's ultimate fate that we see in Rogue One, because Cassian fights to ensure that the Alliance can get the Death Star plans so that the Death Star can be destroyed, which of course we see in A New Hope. But because Cassian dies after the Battle of Scarif, when the Death Star is fired on Scarif, Cassian ultimately does not get to enjoy the rewards of his actions. He doesn't get to live to see the Death Star actually be destroyed. He, Jin, all the other rebels were fighting just with the hope that they could get the plans. And in the end, none of them were able to live to see the Death Star actually be destroyed. It's so powerful. And then the speech Luthen Rael gives in episode 10 is so incredibly powerful. It's so hard. Stellan Skarsgård does an incredible job here. Luthen gives a speech where he basically says, I have sacrificed my decency, my humanity, even my soul for the sake of the rebellion. I am destined to use the tools of my enemies against them. I am condemned for what I do. I'm fighting for a future that I know I will not live to see. It's so powerful that Luthen says, even though I don't believe that I'm going to live to see the results of my actions, I'm still going to fight anyway. It's really good that episode 10 has this theme of sacrifice, a theme of fighting for something despite not believing that you're going to live to see the results of your actions. In fact, we also see this theme of sacrifice with Mon Mothma because she has to make a difficult decision for the sake of the rebellion. She is asked to basically sacrifice her family for the sake of the rebellion because she's talking with this banker as a result of her wanting to keep the Empire from looking too closely at her financial activities because she doesn't want to get caught. So she has to work with this banker that she describes as a thug, not a banker. And then this guy says, yeah, I'll help you, but in exchange, I want my 14-year-old son to meet your daughter Lita, who's about the same age as him. He says, I'm not asking for a betrothal, just asking for them to meet and see if they connect well. But he's asking her to follow this Chandrilan custom from Mon Mothma's home planet that she is not fond of at all. And what he's asking for her to do is basically go against Lita's wishes, make her meet this young man against her will. And so Mon Mothma is basically asked to sacrifice her family for the sake of a noble cause, for the sake of the rebellion. And we see this actually even more in the season finale, where in a rather harsh moment, Mon Mothma deliberately throws her husband Perrin under the rug by saying, "Oh, have you been gambling again?" Knowing full well that their driver, who's an ISB plant working for the Imperial Security Bureau, is listening in. So she deliberately says, "Oh, you've been gambling again," in order to in order to cast suspicion on Perrin, so that the Empire will not suspect her. It's really harsh when you see, oh, Mon Mothma is throwing her husband under the rug. She's trying to basically use him as a fall guy to cast suspicion off of herself. Also, I really like that this show is having Mon Mothma appear more often, exploring her character more, because Mon Mothma is a character that has always been important to the story, but has never actually had a ton of screen time. She was supposed to appear in Revenge of the Sith, but then all the scenes that featured her ended up being cut from the final version of the movie. These scenes show us that Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Padme, along with other members of the Galactic Senate, band together to form something called the Delegation of the 2000. They signed a form called the Petition of the 2000, which formally protested Palpatine's increasing executive power. As the Clone Wars went on, Palpatine gained more and more power. The Senate gave that power to him willingly, not because they were forced to, but because they thought the Clone Wars is an unprecedented crisis that the Republic has not faced before, and so we are fine with the Chancellor becoming more and more powerful for the sake of wartime security, but that leads to Palpatine becoming more and more of a dictator, and of course eventually becoming the Emperor. So all these senators created this form that said, Palpatine, the war is drawing to a close. You need to return power back to the Senate. You need to give up your power, which obviously Palpatine was never actually going to do. But what these scenes really reveal is that Mon Mothma, along with Bail Organa, were some of the initial key founders of the Rebel Alliance because they were there right from the start, before the Empire actually was created, for that matter. Even Padme was actually there right from the beginning. And then Mon Mothma appears in Rogue One, along with along with books and comics, and she also appears in the Clone Wars and Rebels, but she's never actually had much screen time. She's never been a main character, really always been more of a side or supporting character that's important, but is more in the background. Both Andor, has is put into the spotlight more, is a co-lead of the show, even though she still doesn't appear all that much. This is still the most screen time that she's ever actually had before. She was always important, not just because she was one of the initial key founders of the Rebel Alliance, but also because she went on to become the first chancellor of the New Republic. I also really like what we saw from Saw Gerrera in the show so far, because we see here how Saw is paranoid and suspicious of basically everyone. He's been fighting for so long that he's lost his way. He's used such extreme methods that he's become not much better than the enemies that he's fighting against. And so he doesn't have the moral high ground anymore. I think this actually makes Rogue One better. Because after watching Andor, when you watch Rogue One again, you realize Saw is nothing more than a shell of his former self. He's a husk of a man. He's been fighting for so long that he's lost everything. He's completely lost the morality that he used to have in the Clone Wars. He has become basically a terrorist and extremist. That's why the more morally pure members of the rebellion, like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, separated from him because of his brutal and extreme tactics. And his body is damaged along with his mind being damaged. In fact, I think that Saul ultimately chose to die because he realized, I have nothing left to live for. Hey, Imperial Royal Guard production, what is true? You want to go ahead and say what you mean there exactly? So I really enjoyed Andor. Imperial Royal Guard production. Are you talking about with ah? Okay, so what about Andor? Yeah, the show ended up being fantastic. I thought the finale was great. That speech that Marva Andor gave through that hologram was fantastic. I love how as soon as that one Imperial BT, kicked over the droid at BT. No, that's not it. As soon as that one member of the Empire kicked over that droid, all the citizens rose up against the Empire. We see that one guy, Baraka. No, that's not. That's not his name. You see that one guy use use the brick that using. We see that one guy use the brick that has Marva's remains in it to hit the one Imperial. He is awesome there, and then I like Deidre Merrill's character throughout Andor. I like the fact we just see the ISB headquarters, and we really delve into the internal politics of the ISB, which is something that we did not see before. I mean, in Rebels, you have Agent Callus, who's an ISB agent. Even Krennic from Rogue One is actually a member of the ISB. But even though the ISB was present in prior content, we didn't explore it to the same degree that we did in Andor. So I really enjoyed that. Also, man, Nemec was a fantastic char- fantastic character. Now I actually remember B2EMO. Yeah, that's the name of the droid that we see in Andor. That was Marva's droid fired up that holographic message from Marva. Imperial Royal Guard production. Do you want to go ahead and elaborate on what exactly you're talking about here? 'Cause you're saying it's about Andor, but what exactly about the show are you referring to? If you want to continue to post, you can have a conversation. So I really like it. As soon as B2EMO is kicked over, that's the final straw that leads to the big uprising. Uh, Also, man, that torture scene with Bix, oh, it is absolutely brutal. As far as I'm concerned, that interrogation scene where she's being tortured is just one of the most terrifying and nightmare inducing scenes in all of Star Wars. For one, Dr. Gorse is just so creepy. The fact that he has this smile and has this quiet voice while he's doing these awful things is just so scary. And man, and then man, Deidre Miro is so terrifying during that whole scene. And then we learn about the fact that the sentient species was killed. They have we learned that this sentient species was wiped out by the Empire, and they have this choral and melodic cry, as Dr. Gorse phrases it. And then we see that the Imperials are going to put this headpiece on Bix. The music here is so chilling and effective. It's very well composed. It's so incredibly creepy. It makes your hair stand on end. And then when it's put on, the music just cuts out. And then we zoom in on Bix's face, and then we we hear her scream. We don't actually hear this cry. That makes it all the more scary because it allows your imagination to fill in the gaps of what we're not seeing. Oh, that made me just recoil. Like, oh wow, that is such pure nightmare fuel. Imperial Royal Guard production. Are you still there? Because I'd enjoy having a conversation with you. You're welcome to post at any point about anything you want. But for now, I'm going to move on. I personally don't have very many problems with Andor. I mean, like I said before, it's not as fun or entertaining to watch as other Star Wars shows are, but looking at just the quality of the show itself, I don't really have any problems with the show. But moving on now to number 3, we have The Clone Wars 2008, the TV show. Now, this show is definitely structured differently from other shows like Andor or The Mandalorian because The Clone Wars is a anthology style show where it bounces around between many different locations. It features a whole ton of different characters, and then in later seasons of the show, you have this story arc model that the show uses, where if we have 3-4 episodes that are one arc, effectively kind of like a mini movie. I think that was a really smart decision. There are definitely some filler episodes here. In fact, if you're going to watch the Clone Wars, I think the smartest thing you can do is just skip the filler episodes. Stick to the good. Just stick to the good ones. And the show didn't start off the strongest with the 2008 theatrically released movie, which I have already talked about on this list. It's definitely lower. I don't think it's that good. The first 2 seasons are not the best. I think there are actually a lot of episodes in there that are either good or great, but there's some. Uh, those seasons are definitely not as good as later seasons of the show. And the reason why I'm placing the Clone Wars so high up on the list is because what this show does well, it excels at. Even though there are some filler episodes, unlike Andor season 1, which I don't feel has any filler episodes, and then The Mandalorian only has 2 filler episodes. This one has more, but at the same time, The Clone Wars is a 7 episode season show. I mean, so I am definitely willing to cut this show some slack for having filler episodes. But what this show excels at is that one, it drastically improves the character of Anakin Skywalker, who I don't feel was well done in the prequels, but he's done so much better here. Matt Lanter gives a really good perform gives a really good Matt Lanter gives a really good performance. I also think that basically all the other actors and actresses do a good job with their performances. But what the show does well is both show us Anakin's faults that ultimately lead to him becoming Darth Vader, but also show us his good qualities as well. I like that the show actually portrays Anakin as a good person and a likable character. Unlike in Attack of the Clones, where I don't feel Anakin is likable at all. I don't think the young Anakin is good in The Phantom Menace, and I think Anakin is so unbelievably stupid in Revenge of the Sith. But here he is done so much better, and the show does a really good job of giving us more context as to why Anakin distrusts the Jedi. Because there's this one episode where Obi-Wan goes undercover to prevent this plot to assassinate the Chancellor, but this plan involves Obi-Wan faking his death. Except the Jedi do not tell Anakin this is the case; they leave him in the dark, and so he believed for a bit that Obi-Wan was actually dead, and then he learns that a Jedi had planned this all from the beginning, but did not keep him in the loop and left him in the dark. And then Ahsoka, at the end of season 5, is falsely accused of crimes she did not commit, and ultimately she walks away from the Republic and the Jedi Order. This really shakens Anakin's faith in the Jedi, causes him to trust them a lot less because he sees the way that they treated Ahsoka. Also, I think Padme's character is drastically improved by this show because Padme and Anakin's romance comes off as much more believable in the Clone Wars than it did in Attack of the Clones. I still don't know why it is that Padme even fell in love with Anakin in the first place, but this show does a much better job with their romance. Plus, Padme's actually a capable, smart character in this show. She gets in on the action. She shows herself to be kind, smart, intelligent. Smart and intelligent mean basically the same thing, but it's kind, smart, capable, savvy. Padme's character is so much better because in the Phantom Menace, she's such a boring character to watch because like with almost every other character in that movie, she says her lines like a robot. She says her lines in the same boring, dull, monotone way where there's no emotion in the voice at all, no emotion in the face. It's just completely robotic. Let me try to imitate the way that she says her lines. I will not condone a course of action that will lead us to war. The courts take even longer to decide things than the Senate. There's no energy in the voice at all. No enthusiasm, no emotion at all. So her character is really boring to watch. And then Attack of the Clones, she's really dumb in that movie. Soon as Anakin admitted, "Oh yeah, I killed Tusken Raider women and children," she should have just bolted out of there, as the how it should have ended shows us. And then in Revenge of the Sith, it's so sad to see this woman who once got in on the action. We even see this in Attack of the Clones. Is reduced to just being Anakin's wife, who's stuck at home, pregnant, and ultimately dies of a broken heart. Yeah, I know that there's a whole bunch of theories out there about like what really happened, that like Palpatine was maybe sucking away Padme's life force, or maybe Vader did so unconsciously. But the fact is, in the movie itself, we are told that Padme died of a broken heart. That's all that we're told about why Padme dies. I mean, that is just so incredibly sad. Her character is drastically improved because of the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan really well done in this show, just like in the prequels. His character was, for the most part, a bright spot in the prequels. Also, I think that Maul's character is drastically improved as a result of this show. I talked before about how he is no character in the Phantom Menace. He barely does anything. We know so little about him. And in the end, he's so stupid that he stands there like a moron and does absolutely nothing while Obi-Wan cuts him in half. But in the Clone Wars, we see how much of a tragic character he is, that he was taken from his home and his family at a very young age. He did not choose to embrace the dark side. He didn't choose to be a Sith. It was forced on him by Darth Sidious. He was given no choice in the matter. And then after he's cut in half, he loses his mind for a decade, loses his memories, loses his sanity. And he's only barely staying alive. He's only staying alive by focusing in on his anger, rage, and hate toward Obi-Wan. And he becomes incredibly obsessed with revenge against Obi-Wan, yet he never actually succeeds. It's really, really sad. And I like that we see Maul's relationship with Savage Opress, that Maul did care about. Well, Maul was sad when his brother was ultimately killed. It was yet another thing that was taken away from Maul. Plus, he's an intimidating villain, and the actor who plays him does a really, really good job. Savage Opress is a character whose relationship with Maul is well done, though I think his character could have been better. There are definitely some characters that are not as good as others. Like Dooku, as I said before, is really just a villain in this show. There's nothing more to him than that. Grievous not done well at all, unlike in Star Wars Legends in the 2003 show, where he's much better. In the 2008 show, he's just this villain who keeps being defeated and then runs away while looking over his shoulder and saying, "Hey, I'm going to get you heroes next time," but it never actually ends up happening. However, even though not every character is fantastic in the show, what's fantastic about Clone Wars is it takes the clones and turns them into people with different names, different personalities, different distinctive characteristics. If you look at prequels, the clones seem like little more than droids. You don't get a sense that they're actually people in the prequels. You get a sense that they're just simply soldiers who follow orders without question, that are little more are only barely more human than the droids they're fighting against. But in the Clone Wars, we learn about their different names. We see the clones like Rex, Cody, Jesse, Hardcase, Tub, Heavy, Echo. They are different, even though they are genetically the same. Their experiences throughout the war, their experiences with the Jedi, give them individuality to the point where they are actually people and they're really interesting characters, especially Captain Rex, who's a fantastic character in the show. I love the one arc on Umbara where the clones ultimately move to arrest Captain Pon move to arrest Pon Krell due to him being a traitor. This is where Rex really starts to be less by the books because he sees we can't always blindly follow orders. When those orders are wrong, they result in unnecessary deaths. We cannot just blindly follow orders. I love that in that arc you have these clones saying, we follow orders, but we follow just orders, but we're not droids either. We don't blindly follow orders without any question or hesitation at all. That arc is really well done. It shows the clones' individuality. And yet that makes it all the more tragic that we learn that the clones have these chips put into each of them that take over their mind when Order 66 is initiated. So, in Revenge of the Sith, when the Order 66 scene happens, because of the Clone Wars, we now know that this was tragic for the clones as well. They were victims because they were being mind controlled, brainwashed into killing their commanders. We see in this show clones develop strong bonds with the Jedi. In particular, Rex develops a strong relationship with Anakin and his Padawan Ahsoka. So that makes the Order 66 scene hit so much harder. Especially Plo Koon's death hits so much harder now than it did before. That Jedi is not one that we care about just based on the prequels themselves. But in the Clone Wars, we see that he became basically a father to his men. He really cared about the clones. And that makes it all the more gut wrenching that the clones are forced against their will to kill their Jedi, to kill Plo Koon, who truly cared about them. This show really improves on Order 66 a lot. And I enjoyed the Mortis arc as well. It's definitely different from other arcs in the Clone Wars. It's more out there, really, more weird. But I do, however, enjoy it regardless. And also the Siege of Mandalore arc that closes out this show is amazing. Maul is great in these episodes. I love the fact that we see that he knows what's going to happen. He knows that the Republic and the Jedi Order are about to fall, and he wants to actually kill Anakin for the purpose of stopping Sidious from gaining Anakin as his apprentice. We even see that Ahsoka was tempted for a moment to actually join Maul. Maul's saying that what's going to happen is going to happen. There's nothing you can do to stop this tragedy from occurring. And then that scene where Maul is facing off against all the clones, it's brutal, but awesome at the exact same time. And then the Bad Batch arc at the beginning of season 7 is good as well. Yeah, I don't think it's as good as the Siege of Mandalore arc, but I still think it's really good. I don't think that the Martez sister arc in the middle of season 7 is very good. Those aren't even episodes that I want to actually rewatch at all. But what this show does so well is world building. It improves on Order 66, makes the clones characters, shows us so many different planets. We get to meet the Night Sisters, who use the Force in this very different way. Where it seems more like magic. It's this green kind of magic. It's really different. We see this place called Mortis, and we meet these for these Force gods, and we meet all these Jedi that we barely see at all in the prequels, and also on a different note, Asajj Ventress is a great character. The arc that she goes on is very powerful because at first she's just a apprentice. She's just working for Dooku and is at first just a one-dimensional villain. Nothing more to her than that. But after she's betrayed by Dooku, she goes back to the Night Sisters, but then they're tragically all killed off by the Separatists. And so Asajj Ventress doesn't know what her purpose is. She doesn't know where she belongs. She temporarily is a bounty hunter, and we actually see her that she does the right thing. She lets these people who are supposed to be brought in free. She sets them free, despite not needing to. And then when Ahsoka is unjustly accused of crimes she did not commit and so has to go on the run, Ahsoka runs into Ventress. The two of them actually end up working together. Ventress never actually backstabs Ahsoka or betrays her. And in fact, when these clones move in to arrest Ahsoka and bring her back, Ahsoka thinks Ventress is just going to kill them all without hesitation, because that's what Ventress did at the beginning of the show. She would just mow down clone troopers without a second thought. But we see here that Ventress has changed because, yeah, she cuts their blasters in half, incapacitates them, but she doesn't actually kill any of the clones. That whole arc is just so well done. It's so incredibly tragic. And then with regards to Ventress's character, the Dark Disciple novel does a really good job of concluding Ventress's arc, that she falls in love with Quinlan Vos, and in the end, she proves her love by giving her life for him. She chooses to dive in the way of Dooku's Force Lightning, despite knowing that it would kill her. She chooses to lay down her life for the sake of Vos. So in the end, she did the right thing. She redeemed herself. Also, Ahsoka, I mentioned before, she's a fantastic character. That's especially impressive considering that when the 2008 movie came out, a lot of people, myself included, didn't like her, as I talked about earlier on when I talked about the 2008 movie. Even in the first two seasons of the Clone Wars, she's still a bit annoying, but her growth is incredible that we see throughout this show. We see her mature and grow up as a Jedi and as a person as well. And ultimately, she walks away from the Order when she sees that they treated her wrong. They mistreated her and they didn't stand by her at all. They threw her to the wolves to save their own skin. Then, for the most part, they failed to properly apologize to her. So she walks away, and therefore we see that she's going to do the right thing. She makes mistakes, fails throughout the show, but she learns from those mistakes, however. And Anakin and Ahsoka's relationship is so well done. That moment where Anakin and Ahsoka talk after Ahsoka has been pardoned for all these crimes that she was accused of, but the Jedi don't properly apologize to her for the most part. That conversation, so incredibly powerful. And then once the episode ends, the music hits so hard. And also, visually, the show looks really good. I think the music is very well done. I like the intro that all these episodes have with that narration. So I know that some of you might be surprised that I'm placing Clone Wars above Andor and The Mandalorian. But even though this show is not as consistent as those other two shows, I'm placing it higher because it has such great world building, and what it does well, it just excels at. So now we get to the top two, which if you've been following along, you know it's A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. So which one am I going to place at number 2? A New Hope. This movie does a fantastic job of introducing us to the Star Wars galaxy. It set up a galaxy that we've been exploring now for about 40 years. It was the first movie in a franchise that had such a big impact on culture, on the movie industry. I mean, Star Wars is a movie that basically created the modern blockbuster. This movie is so incredibly iconic. Also, the music here is fantastic. Hey, Leah, Elizabeth. Okay, watching Star Wars now. Do you mean that you're watching one of the movies or one of the TV shows? Do you mean that you're watching A New Hope or something else? If you want to post again, I'd have a love to have a conversation with you. Uh, you're watching Return of the Jedi. All right, that's a movie that I've talked about before. Because you just came in now, Leo Elizabeth, I'll tell you right now, I placed Return of the Jedi at number 7 because I think aspects of Return of the Jedi are fantastic. Like the music, the space battle above Endor, the duel between Vader and Luke, the dialogue between Vader and Luke, Ian McDermott's performance as the Emperor, the scenes between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor, Luke's rejection of the dark side, Vader's redemption, the way this movie closes out that story, where the good guys win, the rebels deal a major blow to the Empire, and the Sith are destroyed. That's all really well done, but I do think Return of the Jedi is the weakest of the original trilogy. And compared to A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, I have more problems with Return of the Jedi than those other two. But you can go ahead and post about your thoughts on Return of the Jedi or any of the other films or TV shows. I mean, you can post about anything you want. It's totally up to you. I was talking about A New Hope because I'm at the number 2 spot on my list that has 21 entries in it. This movie does a great job of introducing. Oh, wait, Leah Elizabeth, what do you mean by that? I'm drinking so there. Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, A New Hope does a great job with introducing Luke, Han, and Leia. The arc that Luke goes on throughout the 3 movies, the original trilogy, done very well. Because at first, it's I see, Leah Elizabeth. So, if you want to post about thoughts you have on Return of the Jedi or any of the other Star Wars films or TV shows, or even books, comics, video games for that matter, you can do that. Or you can post about something else if you want. It doesn't have to be about Star Wars. It doesn't matter to me. But I think that the action in A New Hope, very well done. The space battle at the end is great. Also, I think that specifically when it comes to the music, the throne room music at the end is fantastic. The music played during the attack on the Death Star is fantastic. The Force theme is iconic. Ah, I see, Elizabeth. Okay, that's totally fine. So, again, if you want to post in the chat about something else, you totally feel free to do that. It can be. I see. Yeah, the scenes in Death Star, very well done. Leia is a great character in that movie. It's I think, really a good decision to have Leia immediately flip the predictable damsel in distress trope on its head. Because even though, Leia's the princess that's being rescued from the castle, basically, she's being rescued from the Death Star, she doesn't act like a damsel in distress. She's not constantly whining or complaining, anything like that. No, she immediately takes charge and immediately gets in on the action. There's no doubt that Carrie Fisher did a great job playing Leia. It's sad that she ended up dying before during before episode 9 came out. That was really sad. In fact, one thing Lee Elizabeth I actually talked about earlier is that what baffles me so much about the sequel trilogy is just the fact that we never got to actually see Luke, Han, and Leia, the core original trilogy trio, together in the same place even one time throughout the whole trilogy. That's something that I'll never understand. And it's not something that you can really do again and have it be exactly the same. Because it's obvious by now that Harrison Ford's not going to want to come back to play Han Solo again. Carrie Fisher's not alive anymore. Mark Hamill is still active in terms of Star Wars, but it's not going to be the same again. They miss their chance. You can't ever get that back. But I think that Empire Strikes Back is better than A New Hope because it it does a great job of building on top of what A New Hope already established. It takes the story in a different direction, in a darker direction from A New Hope, because The Empire Strikes Back ends on a cliffhanger. It doesn't have a happy ending. It ends on a downer where the good guys have lost, aside from the fact that they all don't die, they all survive to fight another day. It's a downer ending. And for most of the movie, our three main characters are actually separated. I mean, they're together right at the beginning on Hoth, but after the Battle of Hoth, they go their separate ways. Also, the music that we hear in The Empire Strikes Back, like the Imperial March or the Asteroid Chase music, is fantastic. The lightsaber duel between Vader and Obi-Wan is Vader and Luke, sorry, is fantastic. The "I am your father" reveal is a great reveal. That's of course absolutely iconic. Yeah, that's true, Leah Elizabeth. But yeah, Leia's boots are good for sure. Yoda is a great character in The Empire Strikes Back as well. The Yoda theme is a great piece of score. Actually, the Leia theme is a great piece of score for that matter. It's an iconic piece of score that when you hear it, it just sounds pure, innocent, uplifting. It's very heartwarming piece of score. When you hear it, it makes you feel good. With Yoda's theme, it sounds very wondrous, magical, mystical, which fits perfectly because of the fact that Yoda is a Jedi and uses the Force, which absolutely is completely mystical in the original trilogy. Also, the Battle of Hoth is very well done, and the visuals in The Empire Strikes Back, along with New Hope, are good as well. I'm not a fan of the special edition changes that were made for A New Hope. For example, this is something that so many people have talked about: the fact that Han originally shot first in the original release of A New Hope, but then with the special edition, Greedo shoots first and somehow misses when he's so close to Han, which is comical, and the shot does not look very good at all. I think that the scene should never have been tampered with. It was fine the way it was. There was no need to change it. I'm not a fan. I'm also not a fan at all of the Jabba the Hutt scene being re-included in the movie for the special edition. It wasn't included in the original theatrical release of A New Hope. I think that's totally fine. because all the information you need to know is already stated during the conversation between Greedo and Han. So re-including the Jabba scene is pointless because you're getting the same information twice. Even some of the same lines are told verbatim during the Jabba the Hutt scene that we already heard when Greedo was talking to Han. And I also do not think that the effects for Jabba have aged very well at all. I don't think they look good. And then, man, the CGI during the Mos Eisley scene just really distracting because it feels like the equivalent of a little kid waving his arms in the background for attention. You're trying to focus on what's happening, but you keep being distracted by all this stuff in the background that just doesn't fit. But that that really wraps it up, at least when it comes to a Star Wars ranking. Leah Elizabeth, if you want to, you know, post about something, feel free to do that. But if you don't have anything you want to post about, I'm going to be wrapping up here pretty soon. So here, I'm gonna post right now actually. I'm posting right now. All right, so one note I'll quickly make is that I did not include the holiday special for this ranking. In a future ranking, I plan to include it, but I'm also not going to include the old Droids and Ewoks show or the Ewoks Caravan of Courage or Battle of Endor. Those are old, really pretty silly. I don't know, made for TV movies. I don't know what they are exactly, but I haven't watched them, don't have any desire to do so. I'm not going to include them. I'm also not going to include like the Lego Star Wars holiday special that because I haven't seen it. I don't have any desire to watch it. It's just a Lego thing, so I don't even count it. I like I said before, I'm going to include in a future ranking the show Resistance plus the 2000 free show, so that would bring the number up to 23. And then obviously once we get Ahsoka, Skeleton Crew, or The Acolyte, any of the shows that we know are coming up, then I'm going to definitely add those. But I think that's a good place to end things for today. So this is Sean Mary, aka Parma Mary Dog, signing off.